and keep your microphones and cameras off, please. That will be great. Any questions, if you could put them into the chat, please, and we will answer them at the end. As we did say in the invite, this is a bit of a generalised information evening, giving you information about student finance and how it works and the application cycle. If you've got any specific questions about individual applications, your best port of call for help is to go to Student Finance England themselves, and we will be sharing their details throughout this presentation, but we will try and answer as many questions as possible. To begin with, I'm going to introduce myself and Natalie. So Natalie is the WIN Higher Education Advisor for Wiltshire College at the Chippenham and Lackham campuses, and I am the HE Advisor for the Salisbury campus, and there are our details there for you. We do also have a HE Advisor that's recently started at the Trowbridge campus as well, and we will be sharing her details with your students soon. If you've got any general contact information, if you've got any general queries at all, you can email us at win@wiltshire.ac.uk. Or if you have any specific queries for the careers team, please contact them at careers@wiltshire.ac.uk. So what we are going to cover in today's session is we are going to break down the types of funding available to higher education applicants, what you need to expect from the student finance application, and hopefully you will get rid of any myths that some people believe in, and we are going to give you specific information about funding options for EU students, as this has changed since Brexit in January, and information funding for mature students or students who do not live with a parent or carer, and to give you any top tips to help support your student with an application. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen, there are student finance helplines for UK students and EU students. These numbers will be on throughout the presentation, but we will also be sharing a contact list later on as well, which you can download onto your laptop. So to begin with, who needs to apply for student finance? Basically, please bear me as people are coming in and we are admitting them. Anyone who has applied for a level 4 course or higher through the UCAS application system. So that includes anyone who has applied for the traditional 3 to 4 year university course, and that could be a course with a foundation year or placement year. It could be for any student who has applied to do a foundation degree for a local college or at a university, and anyone applying for a higher national certificate or higher national diploma for a local college or university. And again, that includes Wiltshire College. We have a lot of our students progress into our higher education courses, and they do need to apply for student finance as well. So you are entitled to up to 4 years of funding for your first undergraduate degree. If you are going into a course that is longer than 4 years, there is additional funding support available, and that's something you can talk to with your university and with Student Finance England as well. Some people don't realise this, but once you have started your HE course, you will need to reapply for student finance every year that you will be studying. So for example, if your student is going to be starting in September, and they, this time next year, they will have to reapply for student finance for their second year and so on. So please be aware that this process you will have to do for the next few years, depending on how long your course is. So there are two different types of funding available. Student Finance England is who we're going to be talking about today. So that's because we are based in England. However, if you are based in Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, there are different student finance bodies for those home nations as well. Student Finance England provide financial support on behalf of the government for higher education, subject to residency, again, if you live in England. If you are a student or you have a student who lives in England and is going into a degree course in Wales or Scotland, they will still need to apply through Student Finance England because they are an English resident. Okay, so the two main types of HE funding are tuition loans. So this is charged annually by the Higher Education Institute, and it will be a maximum of £9,250. Check with your individual institution on what their tuition fees are. Most universities who are offering a traditional degree will charge the maximum. For colleges offering higher education courses, they tend to offer less, but please check what the exact cost is. No matter what background you come from, Student Finance England will cover the full cost of tuition fees, and they will pay it directly to the institution. So the student does not need to worry about it. As soon as they start in September or October, that cost will be paid straight to the university. They don't need to worry about it at all. The loan they do need to be concerned about is the maintenance loans, because this goes directly into their bank account. This is to cover all general living costs for that student. So that could include accommodation, bills, food, travel costs, any course expenses such as books, but also social time as well, being able to buy clothes, being able to go out and eat and drink with friends as well. This maintenance loan is dependent on your household income, and I'll go into this into a bit more detail in a minute. And it's also dependent on where the student will live whilst studying. This loan is paid directly into the student's account in 3 lump sums per academic year and tends to be the beginning of each term. So September or October for the autumn term, January for the spring term, and April, May, depending on when the summer term starts. Remember, it is the student who is responsible for paying for living expenses themselves. This can be a bit confusing considering the tuition fees are paid straight to the university. If the student is also living at the university, such as in halls, the student will have to pay the university themselves for their halls. That is not covered by the tuition loan. So to go into a little bit more detail about the maintenance loan. So the maintenance loan is dependent on the household income, but also where the student is living. So if a student is living at home while studying, they could receive up to £7,987. This is due to the assumption made by Student Finance England and the government that the student will not be charged as much for rent or food if they are living with parents or carers. If the student has decided to move away from home, live in halls or any other student accommodation, and they are not studying in London, they can receive a maximum of £9,488. If the student is living away from home and living in London, they could receive up to £12,382. And this is because of the belief, and the known fact that accommodation, travel, and any other living cost is more expensive in the capital city. So with household income, it is dependent on, if you could just go back one slide, Natalie, that'd be great. Yeah, so just to have a look at this table in a little bit more detail, if you can see it, if the household income is dependent on the household, on how much parents or carers earn. So if your household income is 25,000 or less, the student will receive the maximum maintenance loan. However, as you can see, the higher the household income, the lower the loan is. So if you go to the next slide, Natalie, thank you. So they are calculated based on the household income from the previous tax year. So you will need to provide evidence of household income from the tax year 2019 to 2020. And this will have to be for both parents or, parent and step-parent who are living at home. So you will both need to provide income. If you receive universal income or disability allowance, you will also need to declare that as well to the Student Finance England. If the applicant lives across multiple households, lives with mum in one house, dad another house, then you can you don't need to put both households down, it's just one. Student Finance England tend to ask if it's where the student lives for the majority of the year. If it's a 50-50 split, you can decide amongst yourselves which household to use. Now, we are aware that a lot can change in a year in Student Finance England, and we know this past year especially has caused a lot of upheaval in people's household income. So Student Finance England allow you to complete a current year income assessment if your household has had a 15% drop in their income. You will need to complete this alongside the student loan application, and you have to complete the student loan application first before you can complete the current year income assessment. If this is something that you're struggling to do, or you don't quite understand what Student Finance England, they are more than happy to talk to you and help you with this. So the maintenance loan is dependent on household income. And we know that students often worry that this isn't going to be enough to cover their costs. So there are additional funding options available. Universities will often provide bursaries, and it does vary depending on which university the applicant goes to. The bursary could be linked to personal circumstances. So again, if the household income is under 25,000, or if the applicant is considered to be a young carer who has had experience of being in care, could even be from a military family. There's lots of different personal circumstances which the universities use to decide who receives a bursary. You could also receive a bursary due to certain types of courses. That could be if you're going into allied healthcare profession degrees, such as nursing or radiography. It could be if you're going into teaching or social work. You might be eligible for an additional bursary. There are also plenty of scholarships around, and we will give you a link to your scholarship hub in a second. Scholarships can be for a variety of reasons, a bit like bursaries. They can be linked to high academic results or strong ability in a subject area. Or it can be awarded by universities or charities or businesses. For example, locally, there's the Wiltshire Community Foundation, who offer bursaries and money to students living in Wiltshire for their studies. If you are a mature student and you have a child or an adult who's financially dependent on you, there are also grants available from Student Finance England that can help you with those dependents. If the student considers themselves to have a physical or mental health condition, a disability or an additional learning need, there is the Disabled Students Allowance, which again is not dependent on household income. It is dependent on the student's need and what they will need the money for. All of those grants, scholarships and bursaries are what we consider free money. They do not need to be paid back. There's no interest on them. So it is really worth looking into if you or your student is eligible for any of these, because it really is worthwhile. Sometimes, students don't have access to bursaries or scholarships for some reason. So a lot of students also go into part-time work. And this could be through the university, maybe as a student ambassador. And this could maybe just be like a few days when there are open events, or it could be quite regularly. Or it could be working for the student union in their bar or shop or the library. We really recommend students try to get a job through this way, because not only are they paid better than the minimum wage normally, but also the university staff working around the student can, really keep an eye on them, on their mental and their health and well-being, which can be a struggle for some students at university. But it also allows that student to become integrated into the university community, which is really important to as well to fit in. But, you know, students can also look for jobs outside in a local area and try and fit in the community in that way. Again, you know, it could be any kind of part-time job in the local area, but often chains of restaurants or shops sometimes try and transfer their students to their university city. For example, if you are currently working as a part-time shop assistant and Waitrose, you might be able to transfer your job to Waitrose in your university city and then transfer back at Christmas. So it saves the student having to apply for a new job, but also means they've got guaranteed income when they go back for the holidays as well. So to give you a little bit more information on bursaries and scholarships, when you are applying for your student finance, we recommend that you allow Student Finance England to share your information with your university or college if you tick that box there. This means that you will be automatically assessed by the university for any bursaries and scholarships. So it's really important that you do tick that because you never know what you might be able to be given. But also do check the university for their bursary and scholarships. They will have a whole page dedicated to it on their website, and we also recommend you use the scholarship.hub.org.uk. This is a fantastic search engine for scholarships. There are thousands and thousands of pounds available for students every year, and much of it is left untouched. So this is a really good opportunity to find some extra funding. It could be for really niche reasons. It could be maybe that you're an asylum seeker or you're really dedicated to a particular sport, or it could just be for more of a generic reason. You might live in the southwest of England. So again, do have a look for it. Have a look for your local area, but also have a look at the local area your university is in as well, and see what is available. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Natalie, who's going to give you a little bit more detail about the application cycle itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. And as we said before, if there's anyone that has any questions about anything that Laura has mentioned earlier in the meeting, please write them in the chat box and we will be taking some time for questions at the end. I will sort of do a little bit of an apology in advance. A lot of the stuff that I'm about to sort of go through is quite information heavy, but it is very important sort of stuff to consider this year for a student finance application. So please do bear with me. And obviously, if there's any questions that we can answer, we'll do our best to do that at the end. So the application cycle is relatively straightforward, actually, in terms of what needs to be done and how to get through it. There are just some key points that people sort of need to keep in mind as they go through and making sure that they've got certain information available. So to start with, very simply, students and parents or guardians or carers will need to make an account online. So students and parents or guardians or carers will need to make separate accounts in order to complete their sides of the application. So we do recommend that that's done sort of before the application starts. However, if the student has started their student finance application and the parent creates a sort of account later, that's absolutely fine. So the starting point is you make your online account. The student then needs to complete their portion of the application. It will ask for details about themselves, and if the student has already confirmed which course that they will be joining or which is their preferred course choice, they can add that information in there as well. If the student has not confirmed or hasn't received all of their offers yet, or they're still waiting to confirm all of their choices, you can still apply for student finance. That's something that can be amended later. So we do recommend that it is done sort of sooner rather than later, even if the courses haven't been confirmed yet or if not all offers have been received. So when the student completes their application, we've just got on the screen there a list of some of the information that student finance will ask for. So passport or birth certificate, typically, a national insurance number, or for EU students or EU nationals, evidence of residency, which we'll go into a little bit more detail about later, and also bank details so that they know who to pay sort of maintenance loans to. So once the student's completed their application, and in terms of that sort of the type of documents that they need, those are the typical documents that student finance requests, but they will provide information about the acceptable evidence on their website and through the application portal. So don't worry too much if they ask for additional things. They will give you guidance on what they need to see. So once the student's completed their side of the application, the parent or guardian will then receive an email or possibly a posted form asking them to complete their side of the application, including sort of their evidence of household income. As Laura said before, if there are two parents or two household earners in the house, you will need to complete an individual application form each. So do please keep that in mind, that you will both need to fill something out to sort of provide evidence of income. So once the parent or guardian has completed their side of the application, everything is then sent off to Student Finance England or your student finance body to process. They will take into consideration all of the detail and information that has been provided on an individual basis, check eligibility and in terms of the amount that you could be eligible for, and then potentially ask for additional information if they need more evidence. But they will always be in contact with you if that is the case. So they won't just sort of hang on and wait for you to provide things. They will let you know if there's anything additional that they need. So once that they've processed everything and they've confirmed additional information or confirmed that the application has been approved, the student will then receive a letter from Student Finance, and is typically a letter in the post, which is their entitlement letter. So this will tell them how much they will be entitled to in terms of their maintenance loan, and then will also give a breakdown of the payments and when to expect those payments. We do highly recommend that you are regularly checking the Student Finance England online accounts, both student and parent, purely because there are occasions when communications or emails or sometimes letters get lost, whether in the post or junk and spam folders, but any communication, that Student Finance England send will be made available on the Student Finance England account. This can also be where if you need to change any data, so bank details, or you need to add information about your course. So if your offer is received later, you can also change the information on that account. So we do recommend that you are keeping an eye on that and checking that regularly. So just so that you've all got this date in mind, Student Finance themselves, Student Finance England, recommend that or ask students to apply and have a completed application with them before the 21st of May 2021. So we've got just under a month now until that deadline. And whilst it isn't like a solid deadline, the reason they ask for this is to ensure that any funding is then in place and ready to go before the start of the academic year. As the presentation says, you can apply after this date, and there are many people that do, but you just need to be aware that if that is the case, your funding may be delayed in terms of the first payment. So the first payment might come through a little bit later than would normally happen if you were to get your application in before that date. So 21st of May 2021 is when they request applications to be in by to ensure funding is in place for the next year. So if you are supporting an application, and I know I've got a picture there of paperwork, I promise you it doesn't have to be a huge stack of paperwork, hopefully in terms of your own supporting application, but they will essentially ask for details of your taxable income, as we said, from the previous tax year, so 2019-2020. If you do need to fill out that current income assessment as a result of a change in income due to COVID-19, there will be additional information that they will ask for in terms of evidence, but again, they will keep you up to date in terms of what it is that they need evidence for. So as we said, if you live with a partner and they bring in a household income, or if they have some kind of income, whether that's the universal credit or anything like that, they will also need to complete an application. And typically, evidence of taxable income normally includes any wages or salary or any type of taxable pay that you receive. If you receive long-term disability benefits, that's something that you will need to provide evidence for. If you are self-employed, evidence of net earnings, and again, they will be very detailed as to what to include for this. So evidence of self-employment earnings will be required. If you gain substantial interest levels from savings, then evidence of this will also be asked for. That one's quite a tough one, because there is a sort of threshold. If you're not sort of hitting above that threshold, they don't need to ask for it, but just make sure you're double checking through everything to ensure we've got all of the necessary forms of evidence included. If you're claiming a pension, they will need to sort of see evidence of that and how much you are claiming per month, or how much you're taking home per month from your pension. And finally, if you have any properties that you gain rental income from, that is something else that they will need to see evidence for. Again, this is quite a general list, and student finance are normally very kind of clear as you go through the application as to what kind of thing they are looking for and what they need in terms of evidence. So please do make sure that you're checking through that very carefully, even before you submit, and making sure that you've got the evidence to hand before you start the application, so it just makes things a little bit easier. So repaying your loan, and this is something that I think has a lot of sort of stigma behind it, as when you see the word loan, people automatically think that they need to start paying it back in huge amounts very, very quickly. So in order to start paying back the tuition fee and maintenance loans, and by this point it is kind of clumped together in one balance, students need to meet a certain set of criteria. So all students will be eligible to start repaying their student finance from the April after graduating. So say if a student graduated this July, it would be April 2021 that they would start being eligible to pay that back their student finance loan. So they'll typically receive a balance letter at the end of that tax year, and then that's when they'll start being eligible, either after graduating or after leaving HE. So even if you don't complete a higher education course, if you've taken a loan back and you haven't repaid that in full, you will need to start making repayments on that. However, whilst that is the case and you are eligible to pay it, you do not have to pay anything back until you earn above the set threshold. So for 2021-22, the current threshold is £27,295. And essentially that means if you come out of a job and you're earning anything below that, you don't have to pay, you won't be paying anything back. So it's not quite as scary as people think. I mean, that salary for a graduate might seem like quite a long way away for some graduates, but the reality is that unless you hit that threshold, you do not need to start paying. You do not need to start paying your student finance. You can choose to if you want to, but that's not necessarily something that would be recommended. But you will not be charged until you hit that threshold. So once you go over that threshold, so the example we've got here is 30,000 and up, and this is where I need to make sure I'm explaining it well. So you will only repay of 9% of the income that is over that threshold. So how it works out for, say, 30,000, so that's £2,705 above the threshold. So you will only pay back 9% of that £2,705, and roughly per month that works out at £20.29. So as you can see, it's a lot more affordable than I think a lot of people realise. And being that I am currently paying in a job where I'm paying my student loan back myself, it's something that I barely notice based on my current earnings. So although my threshold is a little bit lower than that based on when I went to uni. So it really is kind of a small amount to start with, depending on how much you earn. Obviously, these are very generalised groups, and if any salary over the 27,295 will have an individual sort of calculated repayment. These are just approximate payments. But in terms of how much you pay back, it will only be, like as they work out for tax, it will only be 9% of any income that is over that threshold. And then if you find that at any point your income falls down below the threshold, so say you go from a job that's 30,000 to a job that's 26,000, your payments will stop. Equally, if you never have a job that is over that £27,295 thresholds, you will not pay anything back. So it is very much based on how much you earn, and the amount you repay is proportionate to that. So hopefully it won't be something that students notice too much. So as it is a loan, interest is charged, and that's the case, unfortunately, for a lot of loans. The current rate for interest is 5.6%, and that's for 2021-2022, but that is subject to change, obviously, as interest rates do change. So if you do want to keep a close eye on that, you can, but it's just something that we want to make sure you're aware of, that student loans are something that you will get charged for. So in terms of repaying your loan, there's kind of three main things that we want people to keep in mind, that people seem often worry about or get concerned about in terms of repayments. So to start with, a student loan, despite being called a loan, does not affect credit rating or the ability to get any other loans or a mortgage. So if you were to go and apply for, or a student was going to apply for a mortgage 5 or 10 years after they'd graduated, whilst a mortgage lender would like to know if they have student finance debt and how much it is, it will not go against them in terms of sort of like their credit rating and the amount of credit that they are allowed to borrow. And the same goes for if you're applying for loans, credit cards, or car finance. It's not something that is typically held against a student. So that's something that I think is quite nice and reassuring for students that are worried about that in the future. So another thing to consider is that after 30 years, if you have not cleared the loan balance, anything that is left will be cancelled, and that is 30 years from when you graduate. So you could have paid off 10% of your student finance balance, you could have paid off 90%, or however much is left at the end of that 30 years will be wiped out and it will be cancelled, and that will be it. You just won't even need to think about it. So that's something else to consider. It's not something that will necessarily follow you around forever and ever the rest of your life until it is completely paid. It does get cancelled after 30 years. And finally, we do recommend people to think of it as a bit more of a tax. So the way that payments are taken out is that you will, when you apply for jobs on a P45 or P46, you will be asked if you have a student loan balance, and you'll have to tick which student loan plan you have, and typically now it's plan 2. And that will basically register that if you in your job go over that threshold, or if you start that job and you're over that income threshold, you will start automatically paying for your student finance out of your salary. You do not have to calculate or arrange payments yourself. This is done automatically in a very similar way to national insurance or income tax or even pension payments. So the only way that you will realise it's coming out is when you check your salary or your wage slips every month, and you'll see that there is a student finance payment that comes out of that. So we really do try and encourage people to think of it more like a tax rather than a loan. It does sound a little bit less scary, and it also just reassures people that it's not something that they need to work to pay themselves. Now, if you are self-employed, it is slightly different. You will need to arrange for that payment yourself as part of your self-assessment. But again, as is typically recommended with your income tax and national insurance, if you're putting money away every month, then you can work out how much you should be sort of putting away for student finance, or there is a calculator that you can use to work that out, and just put that away separately for private income. So please do remember that if you do go into sort of self-employment, or if your student or your child goes into self-employment. So this is going to be one of the very information heavy sections, just because we do have students at the college who are EU nationals, and as a result of Brexit, the rules for student finance have changed for these students. So it's really important that, whilst this is quite a bit of information and hopefully it's not too much for you to take in, that you are made aware of this. As we've said throughout, we are not the best people to answer questions about specific and individual applications. So if you are an EU national, or the student you're supporting is an EU national, and you have questions about their individual circumstances or an individual application, please do contact the Student Finance Helpline for EU students, and there is a separate helpline for that, which has been shown on the presentation and is available in our contact sheet, which we will send out later on. But they will be the best people to answer any questions you have about individual circumstances. So to start with, if you are an EU national and you were living in the UK by the end of the transition period, which was the 31st of December 2020, you still have citizens' rights, and that's really important to remember. So you can apply for the European Union Settlement Scheme, so the EUSS, until the 30th of June 2021. So if we have any EU nationals in the joining the meeting today, or any students who are EU nationals, you can still apply for the European Union Settlement Scheme if you were living in the UK before the 31st of December. So once you've applied for that, and again, we'll be sort of providing some links about that at the end. Once you've been applied, and if you are approved by the settlement scheme, then you'll be given one of two statuses. So the first is settled status, and that typically means that you have lived in the UK for a minimum of 5 continuous years, or you'll be sort of given pre-settled status, which again typically means that you have lived in the UK for less than 5 continuous years. If you are granted pre-settled status and you sort of meet that 5-year of continuous sort of residency in the UK whilst you're a student or whilst you are in higher education, you can update student finance later on. So when you come to a later application, you can update that. And I do say typically for these because, again, it's very much a case of assessing the individual situation. So please do make sure that if you are concerned or you have questions about the status that you have been granted, you are contacting the people behind the European Union Settlement Scheme, or we do have a citizens advice link, which is going to be on our contact sheet, which we'll provide later. So we are putting May on all of this, and we have to do it for everyone because everyone may be eligible, but EU nationals may be eligible for full undergraduate and postgraduate student finance, which is something separate that you don't need to think about now. So they need to potentially have citizens' rights and settled status under the European Union Settlement Scheme. So if they have been an ordinarily resident in their home domicile, so if you're applying through Student Finance England, it will be England before the start of the academic year, or if you have been an ordinarily resident in the UK for 3 years or more. In terms of pre-settled status, again, EU nationals may be eligible for support, but this is all done on a case-by-case basis based on your individual circumstances, and Student Finance will assess individual circumstances once the applications have been received. So it may be best to apply and see what your offer comes back with, and then if you are concerned or if you think it's incorrect, then you can always get back in touch with Student Finance to challenge. So those are sort of the breakdowns of pre-settled and settled status. If you're an EU national, I'm sure you're already aware of all of this. But in terms of your individual application, there are some additional things that you will need to kind of prove your status and to prove your residency in the UK. So if you have been given your status, you can obtain or you can request a European Union Settlement Scheme share code from the Home Office, and this is something that you can request through that link there. And again, I think it's something that we've included in our contact list later, which you can access. Once you have been given this code, it will be valid for 30 days, and it will be sort of signposted as to where you need to enter that code on the student finance application. So we do recommend that you request the code as soon as you are ready to start your finance application, just to avoid the possibility of it expiring, particularly if you're submitting relatively soon. It's best to get that ready to go. If for whatever reason the code expires, you may need to request a new one from the Home Office, and you might also need to upload a copy of the approval letter to Student Finance England. Again, this is something that you will be told about individually, and this could be something that Student Finance contact you specifically in terms of the evidence that you need to provide. Now, as I said, we are going to have a help and resource sheet that we're going to upload to the chat at the end of this session, and there is a specific section with resources and links for EU nationals and those who will be supporting an EU national applicant. So please do use those links, or you can see that helpline for EU students at the bottom right of the screen there. As we said, whilst we can pass on this information to you, we are very much just providing information that Student Finance England has provided us. We are not the authorities on this, and unfortunately we can't be the one to make suggestions and based on your individual circumstances. So do please contact them if you have any further questions. Okay, so that's the overview for EU nationals. The next group to talk about is independent and mature students. And I'm just going to quickly sort of define what each of those groups are. So a mature student is any student that is starting a higher education course that is aged over 21. Now, mature students could still live at home and they could still live with parents or live with a carer or a guardian. So it may be that even if they are a mature student, that they might need someone to complete an additional application as a parent or a carer or guardian. So a mature student is any student starting a higher education course aged 21 or older. An independent student, however, is any student that is applying for student finance support without the supporting application of a parent or a carer or a guardian. There is quite a long list of what qualifies students to be classed as independent. So I'm not going to, I'll go through it individually, but I'm just going to get the full list up here. There may be other circumstances in which you could be classed as an independent student that aren't included here. That is something, again, to contact Student Finance about. These are the typical kind of reasons why someone would be classed as an independent student. So to start with, if you care for someone under the age of 18 on the first day of your new course, or you're caring for a person under the age of 18, if you are aged over 25 on the first day of your new course, if you were married or in a civil partnership before the start of the academic year, which is a very interesting one because at the moment Student Finance have previously said that even if you separate just before the course starts, you would still be classed as independent. But that's just something to, again, individual circumstances, it will be taken into consideration then. So if you are an applicant that has no living parents, if you have supported yourself for at least 3 years before the course has started, if it's not possible to contact your parents, or if they live outside the EU and it's not safe or practical for them to support you or send funds, if you are classed as estranged from your parents or have not spoken to them for at least 1 year before your course start date, and if you have been in care for any 3-month period on or after the date you turned 16 and before the first day of your new course, which is a very wordy sentence, then those are all of the typical reasons that you would be classed as an independent student. Again, as with a lot of this, depending on your individual circumstances, Student Finance may ask you to provide evidence that you are classed as an independent student, and that can include that typically applies to those who are unable to receive support from their parents if they're outside the EU, or if they are estranged or in care, things like that. But again, we do just recommend you keep checking your account, your Student Finance account, just in case they do request any additional information. For those of you that are married or in a civil partnership, or if you're over the age of 25 and living with a partner, whilst you don't need the support of obviously a parent, carer or a guardian, they will ask for Student Finance will ask for the income details of your partner. So do be prepared that your partner will need to provide their own supporting application to provide the income details to Student Finance. And finally, so this is maybe if there's anyone here who's thinking about doing a course themselves, there is no upper age limit for Student Finance. So if it's your first undergraduate course and you haven't used any of your Student Finance allocation before, there is no upper age limit for applying for Student Finance and Student Finance eligibility. It is calculated slightly differently if you're over the age of 60, but not in a hugely different way, and they typically do offer a very similar kind of offering in terms of the funding. So that was a lot of information from us this evening, and I know it can seem like a bit of a whirlwind having it all thrown at you on this presentation, but there's just a few more takeaways that I kind of want to point out to you before we take any questions, and some key things to remember. So to start with, the tuition fee and the maintenance loan is available to all eligible students. And I do want to make a point of saying eligible, because if for some reason Student Finance England does not class you as eligible, then that just does mean that you will not have access to those loans. However, you can do an eligibility checker through the Student Finance website. I think it's dove.co.uk/student-finance. And in that, as well as a support guide of how to fill out the application, they do have an eligibility checker. So if you're eligible, then some form of a tuition loan and maintenance loan is available. We really do recommend that you research all the funding opportunities from Student Finance England and your universities and colleges before you start your course, because as Laura said earlier, you really might find some hidden gems and useful scholarships or bursary opportunities that can help support you during the degrees or during your student or the applicant that you're supporting's course. So please do make sure you do take some time to research that. Whether that's through Student Finance England, through the Scholarship Hub, or through the university or college itself. Again, we've got that sort of deadline of the 21st of May, but we do recommend that you apply online as soon as you can. And just to make sure things run a little bit more smoothly and a little bit easier, we also recommend having any evidence and documents ready ahead of time. So that's any evidence of income. For students, it's evidence of sort of like your passport, national insurance, and details like that. And yes, please do keep checking your online account regularly, just to make sure that you're not missing any updates or any information requests. And finally, please do remember that there are that specific set of criteria that students need to meet in order to start paying back their loans. So it really isn't based on how much they owe. It's all about how much they earn when they finish their course, and obviously it will increase or decrease depending on how much on their own salary changes. We often find that the sort of looking at the numbers and how much students' loans balances can be is really off-putting for a lot of people. But overall, the reality is that you do need to sort of meet that specific set of criteria in order to even start repaying your loan back. And once you do start paying it back, the percentage and the amounts that you pay back are relatively small and affordable in proportion to how much you're earning. So that's everything from me. Hopefully that session has been informative for you, and thank you again to my colleague Laura for starting the session off. We are happy to sort of take questions now. If there are any specific questions, I'm just checking through the chat if anything else.
Hi Natalie, there was one question from Chloe, which was, can you pay back more than the 9% for the student loan? I have briefly answered it in the chat, but you might want to go into a little bit more detail. I said the 9% is what the Student Finance England uses to decide on how much you pay back on a monthly basis. It's not 9% of the loan you pay back. And you can pay back more than the minimum if you wish. And I also shared a money saving expert.
Yes,
link.
Yeah, the money saving expert. So what I'll do, I can see that we've had a bit of trouble getting that resource list up. What I will do is I'll send an email tomorrow to everyone that was in this meeting today, and I'll include the PowerPoint slides, and I'll include that contact and resource list. And so hopefully everyone will have access to that tomorrow. We really do recommend looking at resources like the money saving expert. Martin Lewis, if anyone is familiar with him, is fantastic. He's got a great video on his student finance page, all about sort of like the common myths around student finance and how it works and how it doesn't work. So do check that out. And also Save the Student. Sorry, I just completely forgot. Save the Student is another really useful tool. If you are an applicant and if you're applying for student finance for yourself, we'd recommend just looking at Save the Student, just because there's a lot of tips and of how to sort of plan and get through and sort out different things as a student. But they've got a fantastic student finance zone. So we really do recommend taking a look at that. And as I said, that is included in the contact list, the useful resources and the useful contacts list, which we will send out tomorrow. So
Lisa's just asked a really good question, actually, about when you should apply for a loan if you intend to take a gap year. You should apply in the spring before you start your university. If you are traveling, I know that's not something we can do at the moment, but if that is something you plan to do before you go to university, you will need to be aware that you do need to fill that that form in the spring before September you start.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Laura. So the main thing to remember is that you're applying now for the academic year starting in September. So students who are applying now will be applying for funding that will be made available in September. Samir, yes, we will share the presentation. We will make sure that we send that email out tomorrow. We'll get that sorted and sent out tomorrow morning. So we'll include the presentation slides and we'll also include that contact list as well. Laura has very kindly posted in a feedback form from this session. If you can take a few minutes to complete that feedback form for us, we would really appreciate it. We are trying to make sure that the information we're giving you is useful and is appreciated. We want to make sure it's right for what you're looking for, so please do let us know how the session was this evening. Equally, if you are, for any reason, have a question that comes out later, what I'm going to do very quickly is just stop sharing my screen. We do have the contact information for ourselves and also for the Careers and Win team at Wiltshire College. So I will just get that up for you now. There we go. So if you do have any questions at all and you didn't want to put them in the chat, please feel free to either contact myself or Laura directly or send an email to the Win email and we will do our best to answer those questions. Are there any more questions from anyone at all this evening? Just give it a few minutes and see if anything comes up.
We know sometimes it is difficult to think of a question on the spot, so please do email us if you do have any questions. We do monitor the email account regularly, so we will try and get back to you as quickly as possible. Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to us and taking time out of your Tuesday evening. We know after a hard day at work, it might not always be fun sitting at a computer and listening about student finance, probably one of the driest subjects we talk about in our work. But we do hope you find it useful. Thank you, Jackie, and we hope you have a lovely rest of the evening. So yeah, enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening.